Hey guys, real quick, just want to let you all know that the Patreon for the channel has now been completely reworked. We've got some fun tiers, so go check them out if you're interested in supporting the channel. Thanks again and enjoy the video.
Man, I sure do wish I could play Super Mario Bros. God, it's been so many years since I played that game. So many memories, so many good times. If only there was a modern console that could play it in today's day and age. I don't think that'll ever happen. Nintendo's too hard at work at focusing on the future. What about Sonic 1? That's another batch of memories that I'm extremely fond of. Just sucks that there isn't an easy way to play that game. Sega's also hard at work at focusing on the future, not dwelling on the past. If only there was an easy way to play that game. Oh shit. Nostalgia. It's the feeling you get when you see something that you haven't seen for a long while, like walking into your old childhood room, or eating at a local diner you haven't seen in so many years, or in this context, playing a game you haven't touched for a good while. Video games were a huge part of my life growing up. I didn't have a lot of friends, and I didn't have the greatest home life either, so I let my imagination run wild in whatever game I picked up.
I have a lot of really fond memories because of that. So many memories, so many good times, and that's a really good way of marketing as well. When an old game was really popular in its heyday, it's okay to use that success years later to sell to the now grown-up generation. A lot of the time you'll see some big companies re-release an old classic under a new collection or with a novelty item that'll get you to chuckle and relive those fond memories. But when something sells well, it's repeated. Again and again and again, until there's nothing left to remember.
Today we're going to be talking about the overuse of nostalgia in today's day and age, and we're going to start off with this little guy here. Tell me, if you grew up playing Super Mario on the NES or the SNES or even the Game Boy, when was the last time you felt nostalgic just from seeing this sprite? If you can easily answer that without hesitation, awesome! I'm glad you can relive those fond memories with ease. If you had to take a minute, or if you're still thinking, there's a reason.
This sprite has been used over and over for years and years. It's really hard to imagine feeling nostalgic for this thing. I say that because I grew up with Mario. I loved playing it back in the day, but I'm honestly sick of seeing this. Every piece of promotional art, any special edition of whatever the fuck Nintendo's shilling out, almost every other video game, bugging pins, even secret Easter eggs, it's everywhere. And it's not going anywhere. See, you could easily say, oh, it's a branding, and while you're technically right, I feel like this alone is enough branding to sell consumers anything. Honestly, using any render of Mario will sell a piece of software. I swear to God, if Nintendo released some version of Mario Odyssey with one of the weird Mario 64 renders, it'd sell 3 million in 4 days. This sprite isn't a lifeline, and Nintendo treats it like it is sometimes. It feels like in order to sell any sort of merchandise that isn't directly from Nintendo, third parties have to go by some sort of Bible that says you need to use the old Mario sprites. There's hundreds upon thousands of different Mario-related assets that could be used in any sort of promotional material.
Now, it's not just Mario. Remember when I said that Nintendo sometimes treats it like a lifeline? Well, Sega.
These poor bastards. Everything always has to revert back to the Genesis days because that's where they thrived. And while yes, Sonic games sell, they just don't like they used to. The media isn't swarming with coverage on how popular and great Sonic is anymore. It's actually the complete opposite. With the introduction and ease of access to social media, it's become a million times easier to voice your opinion on something. I mean, hell, you're watching me. And good god damn, are Sonic fans loud. With almost every other release, Sega just continues to market and brand anything Sonic related with the old sprites. Shirts, mugs, collectibles, fucking loading screens, you name it. But it has more to do than just sprites. I am so sick of seeing Green Hill Zone. Everything always reverts back to Green Hill. This is something I've never understood. See, it's okay to base something on the past. For example, Sonic 2's first act was Emerald Hill. What made these two stages different is that Green Hill's aesthetic was palm trees, waterfalls with lakes, and checkerboarding. Emerald Hill was more smoothed out colors with a flower field, but it had hints of checkerboarding. That's a callback and an aesthetic. Sonic's aesthetic from the classic games is the checkerboarding. Hell, you could just call that Sonic's aesthetic. It's unique to Sonic games. But there's a point where you go overboard. It's no longer an aesthetic and more of a copy and paste. Let's take Splash Hill Zone from Sonic 4. It's just a fucking plastic green hill. But it's one thing to just start the first level of every other game with basically the same level. It's another thing to make the player go through the same level about 8 times in the same damn game. Yes, Sonic Forces. If you can't tell, this is where I started to hate Green Hill even more than I already did. We already had it again in Mania, right after having it in Generations, and Sonic Dash, and Smash Bros, and the Olympic Games, and Sonic Adventure, and Sonic Colors. I could go on. But some games do the right thing when trying to expand upon an aesthetic. Seaside Hill from Sonic Heroes is perfect aesthetically. Look, it's got the checkerboarding, but it's not every other texture in the level. It has its own identity when using the same aesthetic. The point is, stop using Green Hill. You don't have to keep reusing the same level just because your new game might have its own identity. If you want an example of nostalgia being done right, well, let's take a look at Crash Bandicoot. Yes, a platforming mascot in his heyday. Then he had a nasty drug problem. See, Crash is an interesting situation. Right after the prime time of Crash Bandicoot games, Crash was handed off to new developers left and right. No one really knew what to do with him. He had all this fame, but dropped off the map after games started declining hard in quality. I mean, some of them sold pretty well, but after word got out, nothing. Every now and then, it just felt more like people would say, oh yeah, a new Crash game, without any excitement or shred of interest. Don't get me wrong, some of these games during this era were pretty cool. GBA Crash was rad. Most of the time. But main console games were pretty hit and miss, especially when Sierra took over. God, I can't tell you the amount of uncertainty that I felt when this was announced. Like, I'm all for change, but come on. So, right after the Tribal Tattoo Crash era, we had a random iOS game and then nothing. Crash-related news hit a huge dry period. I still remember seeing this image in high school and freaking out thinking it was real. We really did take anything we could get. Flash forward a few years and bam, the Crash Bandicoot remake people were begging for. See, this is a really good way of cashing in on nostalgia without it being overdone. Crash really had nothing for it, and after years and years of nothing, the series for the now grown-up demographic that Crash catered to back in the day is now remade from the ground up for all modern consoles. Now they can relive those memories in the present and maybe even show them to their kids. Along with the remake, we received a huge wave of Crash merch that people loved. It was hyped up so much that the game destroyed sales expectations. You don't really see that with the 50th port of Sonic 1. If Crash had been pumping out the same type of game year after year with little to no change, I promise you we'd all be pretty done with Crash. This already started to happen when Wrath of Cortex came out back in 2001. It was criticized for being too similar to the old games with nothing new being brought to the table. And now we're all eager to know what's in store for the future of Crash games. I can't really say the same for Sonic. It's like every time a Sonic game's announced, my response is always, I hope it's good. This isn't me being excited for a new game from my favorite franchise. This is me hoping I can be excited for a new game from my favorite franchise. Oh, what's that? Another good example of nostalgia being done right? I wonder. Oh, fuck! Spyro! Oh, God, I can't tell you how right this feels. Oh, God, I can't tell you how excited I am for this. Spyro has been dead. Let's face that. Contrary to popular belief, Skylanders is not a Spyro game. It's a game with Spyro in it. I've said that for years and years, and I still do. Spyro has not had his own game in years. He actually went down the same path as Crash, just with a few differences. Instead of being criticized for not bringing anything new to the table, Spyro was criticized for bringing parts of something to the table. Yeah, it was unfinished. Spyro's gameplay just slowly started changing more and more. Eventually, it was hard to convince ourselves that it was still Spyro. When the Lord of the Rings series came out, when the Legend of Spyro series came out, a lot of people were just confused. I remember being part of this group of people as well. This just wasn't something we were used to with Spyro. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you saw my review of the first game a while back, I said it was alright. So, with the closure of the story series and the cancellation of a movie, what next? Well, like Crash, things were a little quiet for a while, but just not for as long. Soon, Activision graced us with this image. Good God, I still remember the uproar. So this time, everyone went back to playing the classics to relive those old memories and hope for something good in the future. After the n.sane announcement, people were quick to hop on the speculation train about possibly bringing Spyro back. And you all know by now that Reignited is a thing, and I'm extremely excited. Reignited and n.sane bring back a good sense of nostalgia. It doesn't feel rushed out or like we're tired of it. No, we're actually all for this. Banking on nostalgia isn't something you can just keep doing year after year with the same properties. Then the concept of nostalgia just doesn't exist. With the current track record, I bet we'll be burnt out on anything nostalgic related by 2025. Now, the games themselves aren't the only culprits here. The market isn't just flush with re-releases of only classic games. Classic consoles have been shit onto store shelves by modern companies for years. The most notorious of these companies is @Games. I hate these guys so much. But one of my favorite videos on this channel is about one of these consoles, so I highly recommend you go check that video out after watching this one, but be warned, it's kinda dated. You guys know about the NES Classic, right? Just a tiny NES with some games in it. It hooks up with an HDMI and has a neat little operating system. It's cool. Not, holy shit, we're completely out of stock 24/7 cool. I never understood this. What was the big deal? I did purchase one when it came out, but sold it about a month or two later. Why? There's no reason to spend close to $100 for these things just to play some games from the 80s and 90s. Not saying they're all bad games or anything, but $100? I know the default argument is, oh, you can play these games on anything nowadays. And well, there's a reason this argument is still being made. You can literally play anything from these consoles on almost any device. Hell, Nintendo proves this point. Every goddamn Nintendo console under the sun has a library of NES games. It's not new. We've seen it before, and there's no reason to jack up the price on a console that offers nothing new. And goddamn you, Nintendo, for starting this trend. Sega and Sony also have mini versions of their old consoles, but what's the point? Sega is a third-party company, so I 100% bet that every game they announce for the Genesis Classic has been on some sort of game collection in the past. And Sony, I mean, these games were only ever on the PS1 or the PS3 digital store, so it's not as common as NES or Genesis games, but $100 for a bunch of PS1 games when they're usually like $5 on the PlayStation store? You know, you don't have to spend $100+ on these things. You have the ability to make your own mini console with all kinds of resources. For example, I spent about $30 and got myself a Raspberry Pi. These things are just tiny computers that you can do all kinds of shit with. I bought a little case for mine, so I use it as my NES/SNES/Genesis/PS1/retro mini console thing. It's got its own operating system and can load a plethora of old games. Again, $30, and you can do even more with it if you wanted to. You can mod some of the classic consoles, but they only have a small size of free space for more games, and you can't easily upgrade the space, so you're limited to what it has. Just pop a micro SD card in here and bam, more storage. Or, something else I've been messing with recently is the PlayStation TV. You guys remember this? It was a Vita for your TV, except it couldn't really play half of the Vita library. Also, it's called the PlayStation TV, but you can't really watch Netflix or Hulu or anything like that. They even got rid of the YouTube app for whatever reason. It's really just a clusterfuck. It felt like Sony dropped support for it and the Vita faster than Nintendo did with the Virtual Boy. Since Sony kinda swept it under the rug after about a year or two, it's now been fully opened up via modding. Now you can plop in any PS1 game and even give it their own neat little bubbles. And these things are cheap nowadays. You can easily pick one up for more than half of the PlayStation Mini's cost, and it's really worth it in my opinion. Not only can you force it to play every Vita game, but you can also make a cool home for PSP and PS1 games. Now, since the Vita memory cards this thing uses are expensive as all hell, someone out there was able to create an alternative finally. Now you can expand the storage for super cheap and add more games. This is probably the best alternative for a classic console. It can play NES, SNES, Game Boy, N64, PS1, PSP, and Vita games. Maybe throw in some Commodore 64 if you really want. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a right way and a wrong way to market with nostalgia. Hundreds of companies just dump a folder of ROM files into these retro consoles every year. I don't know why people kept saying Mega Man was dead. I saw that little fucker everywhere. So with the swarm of mini consoles crashing the market soon, just think twice before spending a third of your paycheck on one. Now, if they did offer something that was less accessible, like if Nintendo offered a GameCube Mini, then sign me the hell up. Or if Sony did a PlayStation 2 Mini. Things like that would be something to consider. But if you want your own retro console, just consider making one. There's hundreds of tutorials tutorials on how to make one of these things, and it's really, really easy, honestly. Let me know if you want to see a video on some of these off-brand retro consoles that are hitting the markets. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next video.